Be human.
Well, keeping in line with today's discussion centering around feminism and sexism, we wanted to discuss how the American Psychological Association's guidelines to better support clients in the wake of the Me Too movement. So last year in 2019, the APA issued new guidelines to help therapists who treat girls and women, noting that changes to education, work, reproductive and caregiving roles, and personal relationships in the last several decades have led to greater equality, but have also changed the ways in which women encounter adversity in the U.S. and around the world. Just a reminder to our listeners, we as therapists are human, and no human is impervious to cultural attitudes around gender or race, and it is absolutely possible for therapists to be sexist, racist, ageist, you name it, they can be it. So the guidelines encourage practitioners to think about how their own experiences and beliefs may impact their treatment. The guidelines focus heavily on the persistence of subtle forms of sexism, including microaggressions. So, Emma Kate, Dave, what do you make of these guidelines, or just even the APA issuing this as a reminder, as an encouragement for clinicians?
I think it's great because the reality is, as a therapist, we have to monitor our own behaviors and our own mannerisms and make sure that they're not potentially interfering with, rapport with your client or with their ability to make progress in their treatment. So if you have a certain framework where, this article nicely highlighted the idea that everybody should be independent and autonomous, but they're minimizing the value of relationships. So there, is importance behind staying connected and building a community. So I think it's a really positive thing.
The APA has done this kind of thing a lot, where they've issued guidelines for particular populations in therapy. So they've done this with men, they've done this with LGBTQ clients, and so on. And so I actually think it's a great practice where you have people that are the experts both at the practitioner level and also at the research level, who are pulling together what are the best practices and things that we need to be aware of, things that we can speak to in therapy, and also just being kind of at least a little more aware of our own biases and our blind spots so that the therapy is the best that it can be. So I think it's a great practice, and I think they've done a great service. If you've listened to the podcast before, I have been critical of the APA in a lot of ways and continue to be in some ways, but this kind of resource that they provide is really, really strong. So I think we're both, there's not a lot of controversy here from our standpoint. Every once in a while, they'll present guidelines and then some media outlet will get a hold of it and make it into a controversial thing. But it's really more of a created media story than it is, something that's inherent to those guidelines. So good stuff.
Dave, I'd be interested to hear from you. You and I work with the same population of young adult men.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, we try to create a non-judgmental, safe place to really help nurture emotional intelligence and men to be able to identify and process their feelings and beliefs. But on the other hand, I come across some incredibly sexist and demeaning statements and beliefs with a number of young men that I work with. How do you navigate those two spheres of being non-judgmental, being supportive, helping men in their mental, emotional growth, while at the same time being faced with some oftentimes very ugly beliefs or statements that they can make about women, whether it be specific women in their lives or just a very sexist belief overall?
The general principle is whatever you need to do to help that client is the way to go. And so this not only applies to guys that make sexist comments or have lifestyles that are misogynistic, but also, we'll hear clients that will make racist comments, that will make homophobic comments, that have attitudes that are very ugly in many cases. Now, that's not always the case. It's not often the case, but it is occasionally. And so for me, the filter is it's not necessarily my job to call them out or take a stand unless I can do it in a way that is helpful to them getting better, and including better in that attitude. And so just like we approach a lot of things, it's a strategic move. If you hear someone make a comment, if you feel like you're sort of like taking a stand or opposing it gets you out of rapport or where you no longer have that person's ear, then that's not the move to make. And so you kind of bide your time and you wait for the right moments and you wait for the right way to frame it. So it's just like all of therapy, where it's a way of taking whatever a person brings to you and being optimally strategic about how to use that to help them. Would you say it differently for you? Do you approach that in a different way?
No, although I do come across pretty often if a guy I'm seeing in therapy says something pretty provocative or incendiary on any level, they oftentimes will ask me, like, what did you think of that? Or where do you stand on that? And it is strategic. It is a judgment call of, like, how do you frame that conversation in a way that really doesn't draw the attention on me or an overall belief system, but really on why they're curious, as well as how do they, if they're really opening up for feedback, how do they think that belief system really is inhibiting their overall well-being, or it supports their well-being and what they're pursuing in life. And you just get them to talk more and more. And that's really, especially with motivational interviewing, you don't challenge it, you roll with it, and you allow them to kind of corner themselves with their own discrepancies, or when they find something that really is incongruent.
I'll give you a good example. I have had a client in the past year that described himself as a blank boy. I won't say the word, and that his goal is to go out and hook up with women, right?
Lovely.
And
so lovely.
Right. And that's his, and so that's the attitude. And yet, because I want to be more strategic, I've gotten him to think about this in a better way, think about attachment style, think about what that means about him, about his long-term attitudes toward women and relationships, rather than just react to that kind of statement or that moment in a way that sort of like shuts him down. It's really to be able to kind of take that and bring it back around in a way that can have maybe a better long-term impact. So,
which I would like to comment on that, because I think the reality is we want to see change and we want it to happen now. And what you all just highlighted is something to underline and emphasize, where when you are trying to change somebody's beliefs on something, if you just bombard them with information, I know we've talked about this before, but the backfire effect happens. You actually can strengthen their beliefs and their opinions on something. And so if we want more gender representation, if we want more, diversity in general with races and all sorts of things, then it is a slow and steady race that is going to win, the battle, so to speak. So thank you guys for doing what you're doing.
Thanks for watching this Being Human segment from the Shrink Tank podcast. To watch the full episode, click here, or to check out previous episodes, click here.